San Quentin Chronicles. Life behind California's iron gates. The door had already closed before he understood what he had lost. The noise echoed longer than the sentence itself, and the silence afterward felt permanent. By the time the chains were removed, the world outside had shrunk to memory. What remained was routine, steel, and the unspoken rules that decide who survives confinement. For thousands, that moment unfolded inside three names that still carry weight in American corrections history: Rikers Island in New York City, San Quentin Rehabilitation Center in California, and the now-closed Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary. Rikers Island sits in the East River between Queens and the Bronx, operating as New York City's primary jail complex. It mainly holds people awaiting trial and those serving shorter local sentences. Unlike long-term prisons, Rikers processes constant movement. Thousands cycle through annually. Some remain only days. Others wait months for court decisions that determine their immediate future. Many housed there have not been convicted of a crime. They are legally presumed innocent, yet live under full custodial control while their cases move through crowded court systems. Daily routine begins before sunrise. Officers conduct mandatory counts, confirming each detainee's presence. Movement for meals, medical care, and court appearances follows strict scheduling. Court transportation shapes everything. A delayed bus can mean a postponed hearing. A postponed hearing can extend detention for weeks, sometimes altering employment and housing outside. Rikers has faced repeated scrutiny over violence, staffing shortages, and detainee safety. Oversight reports have documented assaults and management challenges across different administrations. Mental health remains one of its most serious concerns. Reviews have shown high rates of diagnosed mental illness among detainees, increasing pressure on medical and correctional staff. In response, New York City expanded clinical staffing and created specialized housing units designed to provide therapeutic support within the jail environment. Across the country, San Quentin Rehabilitation Center represents a different correctional model. Located north of San Francisco Bay, it is California's oldest operating prison. San Quentin houses long-term inmates, including individuals serving life sentences. Unlike Rikers, most incarcerated there know the length of their confinement. The facility has gained national attention for rehabilitation initiatives. Educational programs, vocational training, and restorative justice efforts have become central to recent reforms. Inmates can enroll in college-level courses through partnerships with outside institutions. Vocational programs prepare participants for trades intended to support employment after release. State officials describe these efforts as strategies to reduce recidivism and shift prison culture toward structured preparation for reentry. However, rehabilitation operates within a strict security framework. San Quentin has experienced lockdowns during disturbances or investigations, halting programs until order is restored. Long sentences can shape social hierarchies inside housing units. Conflicts sometimes require disciplinary action or temporary segregation. Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary represented another approach entirely. Operating from 1934 to 1963 on an island in San Francisco Bay, it confined federal prisoners considered especially disruptive. The island's isolation served as both physical barrier and psychological deterrent. Cells were compact. Schedules were rigid. Silence was enforced during designated hours. Alcatraz was not escape-proof. Records confirm multiple escape attempts, including the 1962 disappearance of 3 inmates from their cells. Federal investigators concluded the men likely drowned in the bay's cold currents. No bodies were recovered, leaving unanswered questions that continue to draw public interest. By the early 1960s, operational costs at Alcatraz exceeded those of other federal institutions. Infrastructure deterioration and logistical challenges contributed to its closure in 1963. Today, Alcatraz operates as a National Park Service historic site. Visitors walk through preserved cell blocks that once symbolized maximum federal control. Meanwhile, Rikers Island remains active and politically debated. New York City has approved plans to close the complex and replace it with smaller borough-based facilities. Construction delays and legal challenges have slowed that transition. Questions remain about housing capacity, staffing, and safety during reform. San Quentin is also undergoing transformation. California officials announced plans to redesign the facility into a rehabilitation-focused institution inspired partly by European correctional models. Renovations aim to expand classroom space and vocational areas while reshaping housing to encourage program participation rather than passive confinement. Institutional change unfolds gradually. Training staff, updating infrastructure, and shifting long-standing practices require sustained effort. Across all three facilities, one practice remains constant: count procedures. Multiple times daily, officers verify that every individual is accounted for. A miscount triggers immediate lockdown. Movement halts. Searches begin until each person's location is confirmed. Routine defines confinement, yet stability is never guaranteed. Court rulings, policy reforms, and unexpected incidents continue shaping daily life inside these institutions. Behind their gates, decisions made in government offices ripple through housing units quietly. For those inside, consequences are measured in postponed hearings, program access, disciplinary reports, and time itself. Inside Rikers Island, structure and unpredictability exist side by side. A housing unit can move through routine counts and meals without incident, then shift suddenly when conflict breaks out. Use of force investigations have repeatedly drawn public attention. Federal monitors and local oversight agencies have issued reports examining staff conduct, detainee safety, and systemic breakdowns in supervision. For detainees, safety often depends on classification decisions. Housing assignments are based on charges, history, age, and behavior, yet tensions can still develop within shared dormitories. Protective custody units exist for individuals considered vulnerable. These units separate detainees who may face threats from others, but separation can also mean increased isolation. Staffing levels directly affect daily life. When officer shortages occur, recreation periods may be canceled, program access reduced, and movement tightly restricted for security reasons. Those restrictions can intensify frustration. Limited access to phone calls, commissary, or visits compounds the stress of awaiting court decisions in an already uncertain environment. New York City has faced federal court oversight tied to conditions at Rikers. Compliance plans have focused on reducing violence, improving supervision, and expanding mental health services. Yet reform within a large jail complex moves slowly. Training new staff, revising policies, and implementing accountability systems require sustained political and financial commitment. Across the country, San Quentin reflects a different pressure point: long-term incarceration and the question of transformation. California suspended executions in 2019 and dismantled its death row housing model at San Quentin, integrating formerly condemned inmates into the general population. That policy shift marked a structural change in how the state approached its most severe sentences. It also altered internal housing dynamics inside the prison. San Quentin's rehabilitation initiatives operate within this evolving landscape. Programs such as college partnerships and media training have expanded opportunities not widely available in past decades. The prison has hosted journalism workshops and podcast production classes, allowing inmates to develop communication skills under supervision. Supporters argue such programs encourage accountability and reduce repeat offenses after release. Critics question whether access is evenly distributed among the population. Eligibility often depends on disciplinary records and sentence structure. Inmates serving life without parole may still participate, though their release prospects differ significantly from others. Security remains central. Correctional officers monitor movement between housing, classrooms, and job assignments. Count procedures remain mandatory and non-negotiable. When disturbances occur, lockdown procedures are immediate. Inmates return to cells, and program schedules pause until administrators determine conditions are stable. Alcatraz once represented the opposite philosophy: containment over rehabilitation. Federal authorities transferred inmates there for repeated misconduct in other facilities. The goal was to remove disruptive influence from broader prison populations. Privileges were limited compared to other federal institutions. Inmates could work in the kitchen or laundry, but leisure opportunities were minimal. Correspondence and visitation were tightly regulated. The surrounding water served as a constant reminder of separation from the mainland. The 1962 escape attempt intensified national scrutiny. Investigators reconstructed the method used to exit cells, including altered ventilation openings and improvised flotation devices. Despite extensive searches, no conclusive physical evidence confirmed survival. The case remains officially unresolved in public imagination, though federal conclusions remain consistent. Alcatraz closed in 1963 due to cost and infrastructure deterioration. Saltwater corrosion damaged buildings, and supply transport to the island proved expensive. Its closure marked the end of a distinct era in federal corrections. Back in New York, debates over Rikers Island continue. City leaders have reaffirmed commitments to close the complex, yet timelines have shifted repeatedly. Construction of borough-based facilities aims to reduce reliance on a single centralized jail. Advocates argue smaller sites may improve oversight and access to courts. Opponents raise concerns about capacity limits and neighborhood impact. Meanwhile, detainees remain housed at Rikers as policy discussions unfold externally. San Quentin's redesign reflects a broader conversation about incarceration in America. State officials have described plans to transform the institution into a model centered on rehabilitation, education, and community integration within secure boundaries. Renovation plans include expanded educational buildings and redesigned housing intended to resemble campus-style environments rather than traditional cell blocks. Implementation will take years. Funding allocations, construction logistics, and staff retraining must align to sustain meaningful change. Across all three institutions, daily life ultimately depends on procedures. Count times structure the day. Meal distribution follows strict schedules. Movement between spaces is authorized and supervised. Small administrative decisions carry weight. A disciplinary report can affect program eligibility. A classification review can determine housing placement. Court rulings also shape institutional populations. Changes in bail law, sentencing policy, or parole standards directly influence who enters and who leaves. For detainees at Rikers, release may depend on trial outcomes or plea agreements. For inmates at San Quentin, parole hearings mark potential turning points. At Alcatraz, release typically came through sentence completion or transfer, as the facility was never designed for reintegration programming. The contrast between these facilities highlights shifting correctional philosophies across decades. Containment, deterrence, rehabilitation, and reform have each defined different periods of American incarceration policy. Yet within every model, individuals navigate the same essential realities: restricted movement, structured routine, and oversight enforced through count procedures. Outside public view, daily decisions by correctional staff and administrators influence safety, opportunity, and duration of confinement. The broader debate over incarceration continues nationwide. But inside Rikers Island, San Quentin Rehabilitation Center, and the former Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary, life remains defined by institutional structure and the consequences it carries. Time inside correctional institutions moves differently than it does outside. Days are measured less by calendars and more by counts, meals, and controlled movement. At Rikers Island, uncertainty defines that passage of time. Many detainees do not know exactly when their case will conclude or how long they will remain. Pretrial detention can last longer than expected when courts are backlogged. Adjournments, legal motions, and administrative delays extend confinement without a final verdict. For some, release comes suddenly after a judge's ruling or plea agreement. For others, conviction leads to transfer into the New York State prison system. That transfer marks a shift from short-term detention to structured sentencing. The physical move often happens quickly, sometimes within days of final disposition. San Quentin represents what long-term incarceration looks like once that transfer occurs. Individuals serving decades adapt to an environment built around permanence rather than temporary holding. Parole hearings become critical milestones. Inmates eligible for review prepare extensively, compiling disciplinary records, program participation certificates, and documented rehabilitation efforts. The parole board examines behavior history, insight into past crimes, and risk assessments before making decisions. Approval can mean structured reentry planning. Denial resets the waiting period. Reentry preparation at San Quentin includes vocational certifications and educational achievements. These programs aim to equip individuals with practical skills for employment outside prison walls. Community partnerships assist with transitional planning, though success after release depends on housing access, employment opportunities, and support systems. Even with preparation, reentry presents challenges. Long periods of incarceration can create barriers to housing and stable work. Alcatraz offered no such pathway. When it operated, rehabilitation programming was limited. The facility functioned primarily as a disciplinary measure within the federal system. Inmates transferred there often had already failed to comply with rules at other institutions. Release from Alcatraz typically meant transfer back to another federal prison or completion of sentence. Its design reflected mid-20th century correctional priorities: strict order, limited privilege, and deterrence through isolation. Today, Alcatraz stands as a preserved historical site. Visitors tour empty cells, guided by recorded accounts from former officers and inmates. The contrast between its preserved silence and the ongoing activity at Rikers and San Quentin underscores how correctional philosophy has evolved. Public debate now centers on accountability, oversight, and rehabilitation outcomes. At Rikers Island, federal court involvement continues to shape reform efforts. Monitors evaluate compliance with safety standards and use of force policies. City officials face pressure to reduce violence and improve conditions while planning the eventual closure of the complex. The approved plan to replace Rikers with smaller borough-based facilities aims to decentralize detention and bring detainees closer to local courts. Implementation, however, requires years of construction and sustained funding. Until then, operations continue within existing infrastructure. San Quentin's redesign similarly represents a long-term project. California officials have outlined a vision for transforming the prison into a model emphasizing education, vocational training, and normalized living conditions within secure boundaries. The approach draws inspiration from European correctional systems that focus on preparing inmates for reintegration rather than emphasizing punitive isolation. Renovations and cultural change will take time. Correctional staff training, physical redesign, and program expansion must align to sustain meaningful reform. Across all three institutions, staff play a decisive role. Correctional officers enforce rules, conduct counts, supervise movement, and respond to emergencies. Their decisions directly affect safety and stability. Healthcare workers, educators, and counselors operate within the same security framework, balancing institutional policy with individual needs. Small procedural details shape daily life. A disciplinary infraction can restrict program eligibility. A clean record can open access to educational opportunities or preferred housing assignments. Count procedures remain the backbone of institutional control. Multiple times daily, officers verify each individual's presence to prevent escape and ensure accountability. A miscount triggers immediate response. Housing units lock down. Searches begin until every person is confirmed. That constant verification reinforces the central purpose of confinement: control through structure. Yet structure does not eliminate human complexity. Within housing units, individuals build informal networks, seek education, pursue religious services, or simply endure routine until release or transfer. The public often sees only headlines: an incident report, a reform announcement, a policy change. Inside, life continues in measured steps. Count cleared, meals served, program attended, hearing postponed, parole granted or denied. Rikers Island, San Quentin Rehabilitation Center, and the former Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary reflect different eras and approaches to incarceration. One remains active but slated for closure. One is being reshaped around rehabilitation. One exists now only as history. Together, they illustrate how correctional systems adapt to political pressure, public scrutiny, and evolving legal standards. For those confined within their walls, the experience is defined less by symbolism and more by daily procedure. Time, structure, and consequence define each day. And beyond the gates, policy decisions continue shaping what confinement in America becomes next. If the story kept you watching, the next one will stay with you even longer. Subscribe for more real prison documentaries.